They say that only 1 in 3 people describes themselves as truly happy. That statistic haunted me, a cold reminder that I wasn't just unhappy, I was stuck. The idea of lasting joy felt like an unreachable dream, something reserved for people with better lives, better circumstances, or better luck. But for me, it seemed like life was on a loop of struggle, disappointment, and exhaustion. At first glance, nothing in my life was outwardly wrong. I had a stable job, a place to call home, and people who cared about me. Yet every morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that never quite went away. It felt like wearing a mask that everyone believed was genuine, while inside I crumbled bit by bit. The smallest things, like a sink full of dirty dishes or an unanswered message, would send me spiraling. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, questioning if joy was even possible for someone like me. The worst part wasn't the sadness. It was the numbness. I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly alive or present. Joy was no longer a feeling I could access. Everything I did felt like I was going through the motions. I found myself scrolling endlessly on my phone, trying to distract myself from the emptiness, but the endless comparisons to other people's curated lives only made it worse. They seemed to have it all: happiness, fulfillment, purpose, while I was drowning in invisible despair. I remember one evening vividly. It was raining, and I sat on a couch watching the droplets race down the window. The sound of the rain usually brought peace, but that night it only deepened the loneliness. I asked myself aloud, is this it? Is this what life is supposed to feel like? The answer I heard in my heart terrified me. It felt like I was sinking, trapped in a life where happiness was a fleeting, distant memory. For years, I tried to fake it. I smiled when I needed to, laughed at the right times, and kept up appearances. But behind closed doors, I felt like I was breaking apart. People would tell me to cheer up or think positive, as if I hadn't already tried that. I resented them for making it sound so simple when I was fighting a battle they couldn't see. No amount of affirmations or well-meaning advice could touch the ache I carried every day. I threw myself into work, hoping that productivity might fill the void, but all it did was leave me burnout. On weekends, I stayed in bed as long as I could, not because I was resting, but because I had no motivation to face the day. It felt like a war within myself, knowing I should be grateful for what I had but feeling so profoundly unfulfilled. I was exhausted, yet I couldn't escape the mental loop telling me I wasn't enough. One particularly bad night, I broke down in the shower. The hot water couldn't wash away the pain. I sat on the floor, knees to my chest, sobbing because I felt invisible, even to myself. I didn't recognize who I was anymore. Where had my joy gone? Why couldn't I feel anything other than this unbearable emptiness? I felt ashamed for feeling this way. I told myself I was weak, that I should be stronger, happier, more grateful. The voice in my head was merciless. "You'll never be happy," it whispered. "This is all there is for you." I started to believe it. People around me didn't understand. "You have so much to be happy about," they'd say. But they couldn't see the void inside me, the way it sucked the color out of everything. Even the things I once loved, reading, music, the smell of fresh coffee, felt hollow. It was as if joy had packed up and left without a trace, leaving only an empty shell where my heart used to be. I felt trapped in a cycle I didn't know how to break. Some nights, the silence was so deafening that it scared me. I would lie there, wondering if I'd ever wake up with a genuine smile again. Would I ever feel like I belonged in my own life? Eventually, the numbness became unbearable. It wasn't the pain that broke me, it was the nothingness. I had to admit that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. But at that moment, I didn't know where to turn. The only thing I was certain of was that I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. But that's where the story shifts. There is a way out. There is hope. And while I won't share those answers here, I want you to know this. If you felt the way I did, if you've ever questioned whether true happiness is possible, it is. This story isn't just about the darkness I endured. It's about the journey that followed, the lessons I learned, and the practices that helped me build a life filled with real, lasting joy. I never thought I'd find my way out, but I did. And so can you. Here was a point when I realized I couldn't just survive anymore. I had to figure out how to live. But the truth is, the hardest part of the journey wasn't the sadness. It was the fear that no matter what I did, it wouldn't be enough. I'd wake up and wonder if today would be the day I felt something again, but each day seemed to blur into the next. I remember looking at people who seemed genuinely happy and thinking, what do they know that I don't? How do they make it look so effortless? I hated feeling like I was broken. There were days when I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror because all I saw was someone who had lost their spark, their purpose, their reason to keep going. I felt like a shadow of the person I once was, like I was watching my own life from the outside, unable to participate in it. One day, something snapped. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a quiet realization. I was sitting in my car, staring at the steering wheel, and it hit me, I didn't recognize my own life anymore. It wasn't that I was unhappy. I had become nothing. Numb, detached, and that terrified me more than anything. It wasn't just the numbness that was killing me, though. It was the isolation. Even when surrounded by people, I felt alone. I stopped reaching out because I was convinced no one would understand. Every smile felt forced, every conversation hollow. And the worst part, no one noticed. Or maybe they did, and they didn't know how to help. Either way, I was drowning in plain sight. I can't count how many nights I sat in the dark, tears streaming down my face, wondering if it would ever get better. The loneliness was suffocating. It felt like I was screaming into a void, and the only response was silence. I was desperate for someone to reach in and pull me out, but I was too afraid to ask for help. One night, after another bout of sleepless hours and tear-soaked pillows, I realized how exhausted I was, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I wasn't living. I was existing. I needed more. I needed joy. Not fleeting moments of happiness, but something real, something lasting. I wanted to feel alive again. The road ahead wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. But in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would find a way to reclaim my joy. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but for me. Because I deserved more than the shell I had become. There were times I stumbled, times when I doubted I'd ever find my way. But slowly, painfully, I began to see that the life I thought was lost wasn't gone. It was waiting for me to claim it. The answers didn't come all at once, but they came. And the journey toward joy became the most important work of my life. The road to lasting joy is not easy. It requires facing the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore, the wounds you thought time had healed. It's messy, painful, and exhausting, but it's also beautiful. And if you're standing where I once stood, lost, numb, and aching for something more, know this, you are not alone. The life you long for is possible. This isn't the end of the story. It's only the beginning. When I made the decision to reclaim my joy, it felt like the first step toward a better life. But as with any difficult journey, the hardest part was taking that initial step. For so long, I had been trapped in a cycle of negative thought patterns, stress, and endless self-criticism. Breaking free from that seemed almost impossible. Yet, I knew I had to begin somewhere. The first thing I did was stop pretending everything was fine. I stopped pushing my feelings aside and pretending I could just power through. I had to acknowledge the pain and admit that I had been living in a constant state of emotional exhaustion. It was the most freeing moment because it was the first step towards self-compassion. For years, I had been my own harshest critic, but I realized that I had to be kinder to myself if I wanted to heal. One of the first changes I made was setting small, manageable goals. These weren't grandiose dreams of instant happiness or overnight success. They were simple things like getting out of bed when my alarm went off, taking a walk outside, or getting a good night's sleep. It sounds so simple, but when you've been in a state of numbness for so long, these small victories felt like monumental achievements. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't joy yet, but it was something, a crack in the wall that had surrounded my heart. Each day, I made an effort to engage in these small habits. Sometimes, it was as simple as paying attention to my breath or appreciating the beauty of a sunrise. Other times, I made it a point to do something I used to enjoy, even if it was hard. It wasn't about doing everything at once. It was about taking things one day at a time. I started reaching out to people again, something I had avoided for so long. I reconnected with friends and family members who had always supported me, but whom I had pushed away when I was at my lowest. At first, the conversations were awkward. I had so many walls built up around me that letting anyone in felt like a risk. But slowly, I began to feel the warmth of connection again. I started to realize that I wasn't alone in my struggle. There were people who genuinely cared about me and wanted to see me succeed. Another key part of my journey was learning to manage my thoughts. For years, I had let negative self-talk control my life. I had internalized the belief that I wasn't worthy of happiness or success. But through small shifts in my mindset, I began to challenge these thoughts. I started asking myself, is this thought true? And is this thought helping me? At first, it was incredibly hard. The negative thoughts felt so ingrained in my mind that challenging them seemed futile. But with time, I learned to recognize the patterns and replace them with healthier, more constructive thoughts. It wasn't about becoming perfect or never having a bad day. It was about learning to respond to my emotions with kindness and understanding. One of the most powerful practices I adopted was gratitude. I started to focus on what I had rather than what I lacked. I kept a journal where I wrote down 3 things I was grateful for each day. In the beginning, it was hard to come up with anything. I was so used to focusing on the negative that I had forgotten what it felt like to appreciate the little things. But as time passed, I found myself noticing more and more things to be thankful for. Moments of laughter, a good meal, the kindness of a stranger. It was through these small, simple steps that I began to rebuild my sense of self. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't instantly happy, but I was on the path to change. The transformation was slow and gradual, but it was real. Each day, I felt a little lighter, a little more present in my life. The numbness that had consumed me for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of calm and clarity. But the road wasn't without its setbacks. There were days when the darkness crept back in, when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of life. On those days, I had to remind myself that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be better than others, and that was okay. What mattered was that I was still moving forward, no matter how small the steps were. The most important lesson I learned was that lasting happiness isn't something that just happens overnight. It's a practice, a daily commitment to creating a life that brings you joy and fulfillment. It's not about waiting for something to change or hoping for better circumstances. It's about taking control of your own mindset and choosing to find joy in the everyday moments. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. I no longer wake up with that same heaviness in my chest. I no longer feel like happiness is an impossible dream. I have learned how to create a life filled with purpose, connection, and most importantly, joy. But it wasn't just about making small changes. There was a deeper shift that took place within me, a shift in how I saw myself and my worth. I learned that I didn't need to be perfect to be happy. I didn't need to have it all together. What I needed was to embrace who I was, flaws and all, and to give myself permission to be happy despite my struggles. This journey didn't happen in a vacuum. I sought help when I needed it, whether it was through conversations with loved ones, therapy, or reading books that spoke to my soul. One of the most impactful resources I found was a book called The Happiness Habit: Develop Practices for Lasting Joy and Fulfillment. This book completely transformed my understanding of happiness and helped me develop the practices that ultimately changed my life. It guided me step by step through the process of building lasting joy, from learning how to manage my emotions to developing gratitude and cultivating self-compassion. The tools and insights in the book were invaluable, and they provided the foundation I needed to build a life that truly brought me fulfillment. If you're ready to transform your life and develop the happiness habits that will bring you lasting joy, I highly recommend getting a copy of The Happiness Habit: Develop Practices for Lasting Joy and Fulfillment. The journey I took was difficult, but this book provided the blueprint I needed to create the life I had always dreamed of. If you're struggling to find happiness, this book can be the resource you need to start making meaningful changes in your life. Grab your digital copy at LibriaFFY.com and start your own journey toward lasting joy today. As I continued down my path, I noticed something extraordinary starting to happen. It was subtle at first, almost like a quiet whisper, but over time, it became undeniable. I was feeling more at peace with myself. This wasn't the kind of fleeting happiness that came from external circumstances. No, this was something deeper, more fulfilling. It was a joy that stemmed from within, from the choices I was making every day, from the small steps I was taking to heal and grow. I realized that I had spent so much of my life chasing happiness from the outside, thinking that once I had the right job, the perfect relationship, or the ideal circumstances, I would finally feel whole. But what I discovered was that happiness wasn't a destination. It wasn't something you could get, it was something you had to create from the inside out. This new perspective shifted everything. I stopped waiting for life to change for me, and I started changing for life. I took ownership of my happiness, and I no longer relied on others or external circumstances to dictate how I felt. This was incredibly freeing. There were moments when I doubted myself, when old habits crept back in, trying to pull me into negativity and despair. But with the new tools and mindset I had developed, I was able to recognize those thoughts for what they were, old patterns trying to resurface. And I didn't let them. I practiced redirecting my focus, shifting my mindset from what wasn't working to what was. I also learned the power of forgiveness, not just of others, but of myself. I had carried around so much guilt for things I couldn't change, mistakes I had made, and the hurt I had caused. But I realized that holding on to those things only kept me trapped in the past. Forgiving myself became a critical step in my healing. It was as though I had been carrying a heavy weight around, and the moment I let it go, I felt lighter, freer. Gratitude became another powerful tool in my transformation. I remember when I first started practicing it, it felt forced, almost like a chore. But as I kept at it, it began to shift something inside me. I started noticing the beauty in everyday moments, the laughter of children playing in the park, the warmth of a cup of coffee in the morning, the feel of the sun on my face. These small, simple moments began to fill my heart with gratitude, and in turn, they filled my life with more joy. The deeper I delved into these practices, the more I began to realize just how powerful they were. They didn't just change my day-to-day life, they changed who I was as a person. I became more compassionate toward myself and others. I became more present, more mindful of the world around me. I learned to embrace the ebb and flow of life, knowing that even on the tough days, there was something worth appreciating. I began setting new goals that were no longer based on external validation or societal expectations. These were goals rooted in personal growth, in building a life that was meaningful to me. I stopped comparing my journey to others, and instead, I focused on the progress I was making each day. Whether it was learning a new skill, deepening relationships, or simply showing up for myself, I was proud of the steps I was taking toward a more fulfilling life. Looking back, I can hardly recognize the person I was before. The woman who felt lost, numb, and disconnected is no longer who I am. I am now someone who takes active steps every day to create joy, someone who has learned that happiness is a choice, and that lasting joy is not just possible but attainable. That's why I feel so strongly about sharing my journey, because if I can do it, so can you. If you've been struggling to find joy, to feel truly fulfilled, know that it's not out of reach. It's a practice, a habit you can cultivate every single day. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about being intentional with how you approach your life. One of the most transformative resources I found during my journey was a book called The Happiness Habit: Develop Practices for Lasting Joy and Fulfillment. This book didn't just offer theoretical advice, it gave me practical tools that I could apply to my everyday life. From learning how to manage my emotions and thoughts to creating a daily gratitude practice, this book helped me put the pieces together and create a life of lasting joy. If you are ready to experience the same transformation I did, I highly recommend you grab a copy of The Happiness Habit: Develop Practices for Lasting Joy and Fulfillment. The insights, practices, and exercises in this book gave me the tools I needed to completely shift my mindset and rebuild my life. If you feel stuck or lost, if you're struggling to find meaning and joy, this book can help you turn things around. You can get your digital copy at LibriFFY.com and start your journey to lasting joy and fulfillment today. Don't wait any longer to begin living the life you truly deserve. I know what it feels like to be in that dark place, searching for something that feels real, something that isn't fleeting or superficial. I spent years searching for external fixes to my internal struggles, thinking that once I had enough or achieved the perfect circumstances, I would finally feel at peace. But it wasn't until I learned to create lasting joy from within that everything began to shift. The practices in The Happiness Habit: Develop Practices for Lasting Joy and Fulfillment opened my eyes to the true essence of happiness. It wasn't about waiting for the stars to align or hoping that one day things would just magically fall into place. It was about creating the life I wanted day by day, by developing habits and routines that nurtured my well-being and cultivated joy at the deepest level. In the past, I would have scoffed at the idea of a habit bringing lasting joy. I thought that happiness was something that was either present or not, something that couldn't be cultivated or built over time. But now I realize just how much power I have over my own happiness. It's easy to feel like you're not enough or that happiness is out of your control, especially when life feels hard. But the Happiness Habit challenged me to question that mindset. It showed me how small, consistent actions, Things like focusing on my breath, practicing mindfulness, and prioritizing self-care could shift my entire outlook on life. Every day became an opportunity to build a foundation of joy, no matter the circumstances I faced. The beauty of it is that joy isn't a destination, it's a practice. And anyone can practice it, no matter where they are in their journey. It's about showing up for yourself every day, even when it feels difficult, and making the choice to embrace the present moment with gratitude and compassion. If you're feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or disconnected, know that you're not alone. I've been there too, and it's a painful place to be. But you don't have to stay there. I can tell you from personal experience that it's possible to build a life filled with joy, even in the midst of hardship. The happiness habit gave me the tools I needed to take the first steps toward a more fulfilling life. And it didn't just work for me, it can work for you too. If you're ready to break free from the cycle of chasing happiness and instead cultivate it from within, I strongly encourage you to pick up a copy of this life-changing book. You can find it at libriffy.com, where you can download your digital copy and start your own journey toward lasting joy and fulfillment today. Don't wait for tomorrow to begin living the life you've always dreamed of. Take the first step now and start creating the happiness that's been waiting for you all along. To grab a digital copy of the book, just click the link in the description. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.